This is a story about the early years of California's statehood, centering on the years 1850 to 1907. It was a rough period for the new state. California was born on September 9th in 1850, the 31st state of the Union, a free state. It is a story about women as well as children, both bad boys and bad girls. What you gonna do? What you gonna do? It is also about our indigenous children, Latino children, Asian children, and children of African heritage. It is also a sad story of innocent children. It is an era when a child could be imprisoned for no other reason than being poor, an indigenous child wanting to speak their native language, or a girl could be imprisoned for wanting to be an actress. This is a story rarely told. August 1849, our destination is the former Mexican capital for Alta California, Monterey. An important conference will be held in Monterey that will determine California's future. On February 2nd, 1848, just 6 months prior to the conference, the Mexican-American War officially ended. The peace treaty ceded California to the United States. A month before the war ended, on January 24th, 1848, electrifying news exploded on the world stage. Gold was discovered on California's South Fork of the American River. Some contemporaries saw the discovery as a sign of divine providence. There was expectation that the gold rush would create a surging population as well as bring great wealth to California. There was a demand for immediate California statehood. General Riley called for the election of delegates who would attend in Monterey a constitutional convention. To gain statehood, California would need a constitution. For 2 months, convention delegates argued over the laws that would soon rule the new state of California, laws that would also affect women and children. Like all other states of the Union except Louisiana, California delegates voted to base California laws on the English common law. English common law had lots to say about women and children. In 1850, United States Census reported that only 3% of California's population were women. California did not reach an equal male-to-female ratio until the 1950 census. California's first constitution, 1849, guaranteed equal rights for her citizens. Well, sort of. There were exceptions limiting rights to women, people of color, and indigenous people. Women did not have the right to vote and were subject to gender-specific labor rights. The laws clearly stated that women could not sit on juries. Women and girls would need to accept and adhere to both the moral standards of the period, as well as the laws spelled out in the California Constitution and the new laws created by the state of California. Failure to do so could have severe legal consequences, as you, as an adult or as a child, could be accused of leading an idle and dissolute life. England had hundreds of years to develop their jails, gallows, whipping posts, stocks. English common law was designed to instill fear in any and all who would decide to enter a life of crime. Unless specified by specific codes, judges could sentence unlimited fines and unlimited punishment. During the first years of statehood, California had no infrastructure to control lawlessness. As a result, the new state turned law enforcement over to local control. Local jails proved inadequate. Throughout the Mother Lode, so-called citizens committees or vigilantes arrested suspects, became the judge and jury, and handed out punishment. Between 1849 and 1902, there were an estimated 380 lynchings. Some of the other penalties included severing ears, whippings, or fines. Latinos composed a disproportionate high percentage of those who were found guilty. Gold was for the Anglo-Americans. Slowly, modern jails were built, as well as halls of justices. In July of 1894, Placer County dedicated their new courthouse. It did not take long before the good citizens realized they forgot to build jail cells for women. Not to worry, a space was found under the north steps of the courthouse. The cell provided for 2 cots. An official women's prison would have to wait until 1941. Without the infrastructure or funds, local communities could not handle the influx of criminals. A state prison was needed. The state received an estimate that a state prison would cost $100,000. Looking for a more economical solution, the state accepted a proposal from San Francisco's Sheriff John Coffee Hayes and General Guadalupe Vallejo. Vallejo would donate 20 acres of his land for building a state prison. To temporarily hold prisoners, a prison ship would be anchored offshore. In need of prisoners, Hayes and Vallejo offered local authorities a subsidy for each prisoner they would transfer to the future San Quentin prison. The offer was just too good to pass up. Deputies as far away as San Diego were escorting criminals north. Very quickly, the prison ship was swamped with felons, more than the prison ship could accommodate. Hayes and Vallejo had planned to profit through the use of free prison labor, but the high cost of running the prison ship, as well as the numerous prison escapes, their plan failed. However, work on building a new state prison continued. Prisoners would be sent ashore each day to quarry granite. Block by block, the San Quentin prison would rise. The same plan of using prison labor would also be used to build Folsom Prison. English common law called for instilling fear as a way of preventing crime or recidivism. San Quentin would open in 1854 with 48 windowless granite prison cells. The granite prison cells would hold 250 inmates. Incarcerated side by side, the prison would handle both men and women. Folsom would open in 1880. Until 1929, Folsom would also hold women prisoners. However, there was no plan on how to handle the growing number of juvenile offenders. Under English common law, children were under the complete control of their parents until age 14. After age 14, the child suddenly became an adult. Until a permanent solution for holding youthful offenders, San Quentin recorded over the next few years holding 300 children alongside adult criminals. Another 600 children were held in other local prisons. There was no state juvenile justice system. In 1860, the San Francisco Board of Education reported that the number of children under the age of 15 was 12,116. A decade later, the population had surged to 34,710. City leaders feared that San Francisco would be facing the creation of a permanent pauper class. A dance began as the state and local authorities looked to both for-profit and non-profit agencies to handle the growing number of orphans, lawless adolescents, unwanted children, or children at risk. The state would offer small subsidies. As noted, under English common law, adolescents age 14 or over were adults. To handle younger children, ages 3 through 12 years of age, the San Francisco Orphan Asylum Society was formed. The orphanage was originally founded to help orphaned children whose parents died of cholera en route to San Francisco. The orphanage opened its doors on March 22, 1854.
Why did they send orphan children to an orphanage? Couldn't the children be adopted?
That is a good question. English primogeniture laws said nothing about adoption. Upon the death of the father, the entire English estate was to be inherited by the eldest son. Girls did not have any rights except if they were the last surviving child. The reason was the desire to keep the vast estates intact. When the United States won her independence, primogeniture laws were tossed out. However, adoption of a child was still not recognized. In 1851, Massachusetts implemented the first laws recognizing adoption. The law viewed the welfare of the child over the right of the adult. Finally, in 1870, California passed its first adoption law. However, adoptions would not solve the problem of unwanted children. There was social stigma against adopting a child of different ethnicity or a child from a different social class. Not all little girls were made of sugar and spice. Let me introduce you to Mary Avery, age 12, a resident of San Francisco. The date is one night in November 1877. Mary Avery gathered a gang of 6 boys ages 10 through 13, plus a homeless boy age 17. Her youthful gang first robbed a gun store of 112 pistols, ammunition, and gunpowder. 2 days later, they broke into a wealthy home. They took toys and music boxes. Avery customized her dresses so she could hide stolen items. After 2 years of lawless behavior, now age 14, a judge sentenced Mary to a nunnery. Not just any nunnery, but San Francisco's Magdalene Asylum. I have no idea if the nuns of the Magdalene Asylum sang. Historian Beth Weingartner noted the Magdalene was not a true nunnery. Although they did recruit from their inmate population, the girls were sentenced to the industrial school for petty crimes or even non-crimes. The Magdalene was also a house of refuge, maternity home, and mental institution. As Mary Avery was escorted into the Mag, we need to turn the clock back in time and investigate the history of the Magdalene Asylum. Its history takes us back to Victorian England. The 18th century saw the transformation of England from a rural society into an industrial giant. Families, including young single women, left their rural homes to become wage earners. The textile factories were booming. The downside was the new industrial age created urban slums and an increase in crime. Young women were especially vulnerable. They sought survival in any way they could, which was a recipe for disaster. Some women received refuge in Protestant churches. The Roman Catholic Church, however, would soon become the dominant place of refuge. In 1758, in London's suburb called Whitechapel, the first Magdalene institution was founded. Women from age 15 to 40 were turned over to Magdalene Hospital of Penitent Prostitutes. The belief was that the nuns could help transform these fallen women into acceptable society. The Magdalene monasteries took their name from the biblical story of Mary Magdalene. By the late 1800s, there were 300 English Magdalene institutions. Instead of being a refuge, the Magdalene Asylums morphed into becoming a penitentiary, prisons. Magdalene monasteries became known for their slave labor laundries. In the United States, the first Magdalene Society asylums opened in Philadelphia in 1801, followed quickly in New York, Boston, and Chicago. In 1858, the Irish Magdalene nuns stepped ashore in San Francisco. It would take a decade before the San Francisco Magdalene Asylum would be ready to accept young women needing redemption, whether the girls wanted redemption or not. To fund the nunnery, the nuns accepted public donations, sold needlepoint made by the girls, as well as received state funding. State funding would end eventually as the state decided it was not constitutional to support religious institutions. In California, there was both public and political consensus that organizations such as the Magdalene Asylum could save children from leading a life of crime or turning children away from nonconformity, or as they would say, leading an idle and desolate life. Not all the girls who were sent to the MAG had committed crimes. In June of 1890, Arabella Allen, age 17, was arrested on her parents' request because she was alleged to have fallen in love with a local gang leader. That same month, both May Hurley and Maggie Harrington were also arrested on their parents' request for living with 5 hoodlums. There was no trial nor any proof given. The 3 girls found themselves bound into slave labor at the MAG. Mary Jane McAtter, age 17, wanted to become an actress. She disobeyed her aunt, who was her guardian, accepted parts in local productions. Her aunt had the sheriff locate her and brought her before a judge, who remanded her to the Magdalene Asylum. Against her will, her crime, she was leading an idle, desolate life. There were escapes. There was punishment. Girls could be placed in a cell located in the cellar, fed only bread and water. Professor Andrew Kendrick summarized his thoughts on the Scottish Magdalene Asylums. His thoughts could also be said of San Francisco's MAG. The rescue and reform of these girls and women then was based on 3 elements of education and discipline. They would be saved through Christian worship, prayers, and religious instruction. They would be trained to be obedient, respectful, and hardworking employees able to take up a productive role in society. They would be also taught the necessary skills regarded as suitable for their status, domestic duties such as cleaning, sewing, cooking, and laundry. Behind the MAG was a small cemetery for sisters and their charges. Their secrets would remain secrets forever. As you stroll through an historic English town, cast your eyes up from the store windows to the roofs and their chimneys. Think back to when coal was king. To prevent fires, these chimneys had to be cleaned of soot. Only young children were small enough to fit into these narrow tunnels. Certainly not children from wealthy families were so employed. In 1819, English common law set the minimum age for a child to work in a factory at age 9. In 1905, California passed its first child labor law. The law exempted agriculture and set 14 as the earliest age a child could work. Captured by one of the first motion picture films, a woman tosses coins to vagrant children. Once again, we look to England for an idea on how to uplift our children. Sheriff of Aberdeen, Scotland, William Watson, needed a plan to reduce crime generated by gangs of children who were living in abject poverty, children who infested our streets begging and stealing. For his plan, more than likely, Sheriff Watson took a page out of the Magdalene Asylum's playbook when he created the Boys' School of Industry. His schools would provide education for boys ages 8 through 14. His first school of industry opened its doors to 109 boys. The school's hours were 6 a.m. to 8 p.m. Curriculum included religious worship, a work session where boys learned to tease wool, learned net making, and gardening. Each day a hearty dinner was provided. At 8 p.m., unlike the Magdalene Asylum, the boys went home to their families. Homeless boys were sent to a refuge home. Financial support for the schools came from volunteers, donations, as well as a fee from parents who could afford to pay. As a result of the industrial schools, the sheriff reported that vagrancy and crime was reduced. With the school's success, other industrial schools opened throughout the United Kingdom. The success of the English industrial schools crossed the Atlantic Ocean. Industrial schools opened for boys and girls in Massachusetts and New York. In the need of a plan to reduce juvenile delinquency, on April 15, 1858, California's legislature passed the Industrial School Act. The act created California's first institution for neglected and delinquent youths. Funds for the industrial schools would come from both state and local sources. California was taking its first tepid steps in what would become the California Division of Juvenile Justice. During the gold rush, Marysville was the gateway to the northern goldfields. The city had riverboat service to Sacramento, as well as being a stagecoach hub. Marysville was chosen as one of 2 cities to be a site for a California industrial school. The other site would be San Francisco. On April 11, 1860, the Marysville Daily Appeal reported, "There shall be erected upon the land conveyed to the city of Marysville a state reform school for the instruction, employment, and reform of juvenile offenders." The Sonoma Democrat, November 21, 1861. The object of the institution is to reform, if possible, youths between the ages of 8 and 16 who are convicted of offenses against the laws and thus amenable to be sentenced to be imprisoned for a stated time. The Marysville Industrial School became a disaster. While the site at most housed only 50 children, the inspectors found the site filthy. There was little, if any, opportunity to learn a skill. Harsh daily regimen of physical labor, physical abuse of inmates, mismanagement. The cost to the state was over $18,000 for just 2 years. My inflation calculator estimated the cost to the state in today's dollars at $682,690. Upon closing, the Marysville inmates were transferred to the newly opened San Francisco Industrial School. Catching a train? As you rush into LA's Union Station, few would realize that this was the site of Los Angeles' first orphanage. Orphanages were a bit fussy on which children they would accept. Usually they declined children who were under the age of 4, as well as children who came from impoverished homes or children who were neglected. To fill the gap, houses of refuge were established. In 1854, San Francisco took the first step in establishing a children's refuge. The city purchased 100 acres of land for $10,000. If you visit the City College of San Francisco, you are standing on land that was once destined to be the site of the proposed refuge. Unfortunately, the city had no funds to construct or even run a children's refuge. In 1858, the project was revived when the state passed the Industrial School Act. With state funding, the project expanded its scope, becoming the San Francisco Industrial School. San Francisco would receive $20,000 of state funding. San Francisco would need to ante up $10,000. Local donations would also be needed. In addition, the state would subsidize the school with a $1,000 monthly payment. A separate board, not the state, would oversee the industrial school. Except for the monthly state contribution, the school would need to be financially self-sufficient. A key point to remember. With great fanfare, the future California State Supreme Court Judge Joseph B. Crockett gave the opening address for the grand opening. Indeed, such an institution is absolutely indispensable at San Francisco. Our need for it is greater even than that of more populous cities elsewhere, and very obvious reasons. The journey to California from the Atlantic states and from Europe is long and arduous. Many families arrive here sick and destitute, and in their struggle with poverty and disease, their children are utterly neglected and left to shift for themselves. The sequel is soon told. They ramble through the streets and fall into bad company and quickly become thieves and vagabonds. Another reason is to be found in the fact that so many families have no permanent homes, but live at boarding houses, hotels, or in some temporary manner, by means of which wholesome home influences are destroyed or impaired, and the children are almost withdrawn for the parental authority. There is but one remedy for these evils. The offenders must be withdrawn from evil associations. They must be restrained from all vicious indulgences, and by considerate kindness must be weaned from their ill practices. They must be taught to labor and must be elevated in their own esteem. During the first year, the school admitted 60 boys and 5 girls. Of the 60 children, 9 had committed petty larceny, 2 were vagrants, and 1 was committed for grand larceny. If you do the math, that left 53 children who were innocent of any crime. Children under the age of 5 could be admitted because they were leading an idle, dissolute life. With the completion of the school's northern wing, funding the industrial school became more dependent on the children, making the school's 100-acre farm profitable. There was little time dedicated to education or even learning a trade. The daily routine had the children awaken at 5:30 a.m. for breakfast. They were sent to the rear of the building to begin working on the farm, a break for lunch, and then back to farm labor. Dinner was served at 6 p.m. Exhausted from their labor, at 7 p.m. to 8:30 p.m. they attended school. The routine continued day after day. Many tried to escape. To stop the children from escaping, their shoes and socks were collected each night. Many just ran away from their field work into the city. To collect produce grown on the farm, the San Jose-San Francisco Railroad built a spur ending 100 yards from the school's front door. Profit was more important than the welfare of the children. Behind the main building was the laundry. That is where most of the girls labored. What the investigators found were children being tortured. There was no gymnasium, no play area. There were no shop classes. Nothing was provided to learn an occupational skill. What they saw was a prison for disobedience or trying to escape. Boys were placed in a damp isolation cell without any sunlight, with only the hard cement floor as a bed. The inspectors found another child who was hogtied with a stick thrust sideways into his mouth. He was manacled in an awkward position, causing great pain. He was left in pain in a cell for more than a day. Children were also suffering brutal whippings. If the school wished to remove some of the older boys in order to replace them with more pliable younger children, the school apprenticed the boys to ships in harbor. In fact, the USS Jamestown was used for that purpose. I know that many of our inmates have, after leaving our care, fall into former bad habits, but this cannot be charged against the institution. They nearly all come from evil associations or wretched localities, and when release is to be wondered at that they should in many cases resume their former associations and become part of the people by whom they are surrounded. The delegation found a recaptured runaway boy laying face down in a shut-up, stench-smelling, dark, damp cell. He was face down on the hard floor trying to steal a spot of sunlight. He had only been fed bread and water. A member of the grand jury muttered that being treated like this for 2 weeks would make an idiot of an adult. It is the year 1884. In 8 years, in 1892, after 30 years, the industrial school will shut down. But for a moment, let us look at the children the industrial school admitted. The school accepted 166 children. Of those who were admitted, only 43 had committed a crime. We began with a dance. California thought that helping problem children could be handled with a hybrid system of nonprofits and a small financial assistance from the state. Obviously, this did not work. A new game plan would have to be created. With the closing of the failed San Francisco Industrial School, the state needed a new plan in how to solve juvenile crime. Our story moves to the rural town of Ione, 130 miles southeast of San Francisco. In 1887, San Quentin Prison held 154 boys, while Folsom housed 56 boys. The boys' offenses ranged from very serious to vagrancy. In California State Prison, education opportunities were limited, or best noted, not at all. At San Quentin, the prison ran a jute mill, making burlap bags, while also they had an opportunity to make bricks. At Folsom, the prison manufactured ice, as well as the prison offered the opportunity to quarry granite. In both prisons, older prisoners shared with their younger prisoners their knowledge of theft, murder, and rape. Public outrage concerning what was happening at both the notorious San Francisco and Marysville industrial schools, as well as placing youthful offenders alongside hardened criminals in San Quentin and Folsom State prisons, reached the powerful State Prison Board. The board was also hearing complaints from state educators. The board called for legislative action. Senator Edward M. Preston submitted the bill. The bill called for the creation of 2 state-run industrial schools, one in Southern California, Whittier, and one in Northern California. The Whittier School accepted girls. In 1913, the state opened the Ventura School for Girls. Where to locate the boys' reformatory prison became controversial. Senator Preston recommended a spot next to Folsom Prison. The Folsom site was quickly nixed. It was suggested a site in a more rural town, Ione, would be a much better location. To soothe ruffled feathers, the school was named the Preston Industrial School. To build the Ione Industrial School, the state chose a renowned architect known for his work designing institutional buildings, William Henry Weeks. Weeks chose a Romanesque revival style. The reform school would be 3 stories high, which included outbuildings. The complex would encompass 50,000 square feet. The Ione Iron and Coal Company sold the state 230 acres at $30 per acre, and in good faith the company tossed in an additional 100 acres. Eventually, the Preston Industrial School campus would encompass 1,000 acres. Southern Pacific Railroad had a spur from the main line to Ione. The only problem was the construction site was 2 miles away from the closest point where the construction material could be unloaded. From Folsom Prison, SP transported granite and marble for the front steps and columns. Shipped from San Quentin Prison, kilns were thousands of bricks, 6,000 bricks per carload. The school would open with gas lamps. The following year, a Pelton wheel generator was secured, which provided electric power throughout the school. Other updates included gas heating, which replaced coal. On June 13, 1894, the Ione Industrial School officially opened. It would serve until 1960, when it closed.
The castle was beautiful. I love the fact that our juveniles were removed from our state prisons and relocated in the foothills of the Sierra. However, did the state create an industrial school which provided a safe environment? Were the educational opportunities scheduled? And were there opportunities to learn occupational skills? I hope this is true.
Very good questions. In the beginning, the castle opened with good intentions. The school divided its curriculum into 3 divisions: academic, military, and industrial. There would be a block of time each day of 4.5 hours set aside for education. In fact, Preston would become a credited school. There would be skills and farming shop classes. Much later, there would be an automotive repair class available. For recreation, there would be sports teams and a band. There was a flip side to Preston's high hopes of creating a more compassionate reform school. The superintendent controlled the school. One must consider the wide range of the prison's wards. From vagrants and homeless children, there were also hardcore, dangerous criminals. For not following the rules, one could lose one's privileges. For major infractions, there was starvation, isolation, paddling in front of their peers, and lashing. How a juvenile was assigned to Preston or any state jail was founded on an ancient English doctrine which declared the king to be the guardian of all his subjects. This permitted local judges to have wide discretion in handling juvenile cases. It was not until 1903 when California established its first juvenile courts. 4 years later, in 1907, all youths under the age of 18 were transferred out of San Quentin, and in 1909, juvenile justice halls were established. By 1960, the castle was tired, needing major renovations. State financial cuts to the school shut down even the agricultural program. Except for the Preston band, there was little of the innovative curriculum left, or for their wards to occupy their days. Only the few best players could be on a sports team. Only a few could take an automotive class. Rather than renovate the castle, it was cheaper to build a new facility. Their only crime was proximity. To the Spanish, because of the Pacific currents, Alta California protected the Spanish trade routes to the Orient. Forts needed to be built with their slave labor. Our indigenous people lived near streams, but that is where gold was to be found. They lived in the forest, but that was where there was lumber needed to build the new state of California. Our first governor, Peter Burnett, said, the final solution was that they needed to be exterminated. Prior to European contact, California's indigenous population may have been as high as 700,000. By the end of the 1800s, their population may have fallen to as low as 25,000. How were the survivors to be treated, especially their children? Alta California newspaper, 1855. One of the most infamous practices known to modern times has been carried on for several months past against the Aborigines of California. It has been the custom of certain disreputable persons to steal away young Indian boys and girls and carry them off and sell them to white folks for whatever they could get. In order to do this, they are obliged in many cases to kill the parents, for low as they are on the scale of humanity, they, the Indians, have the instinctive love of their offsprings, which prompts them to defend them at the sacrifice of their lives. In 1850, even before official statehood, California began passing laws concerning indigenous people. After rejecting a law respecting tribal land, the state passed the Protection of the Indian Act, the Indentured Servitude and Apprentice Act, and the Indian School Act. The new laws noted if a court ruled that the Indian was a vagrant or he or she was loitering, the Indian could be sentenced to 4 months of labor. If an Indian broke a law and could not pay the fine, they could be bailed out by a white person and forced to work for the white person without pay. Another law provided that a judge could force Indians, regardless of age, into becoming an apprentice. They would be bound to a ranch up to age 30. In reality, legalized slavery. The Sacramento Union newspaper published the names and ages of those who were locally forced into apprenticeships. On January 31st, 1865, Congress passed the 13th Amendment to the Constitution, which formally abolished slavery. One would have assumed that apprenticeships would have been outlawed, as it was involuntary servitude. After the Civil War, the federal government created Indian boarding schools. Here, children from across the United States were removed from their families and placed in boarding schools. On purpose, the schools were located far from the children's ancestral homes. Many times their parents had to be coerced into giving permission. The goal was to create a new generation, a generation of indigenous people stripped of their ancestral heritage, remade patriotic to the United States, and having a new faith, Christianity. Upon arrival, the terrified child was first washed in kerosene, then placed in a chair where their hair was cut short. Their given names were changed to Christian names. Traditional clothing was removed for boarding school attire. The goal was to train the children to be farmers, cooks, and maids. Brigadier General Richard Henry Pratt, the superintendent of the Carlisle School in Pennsylvania, stated, "The goal was to kill the Indian and save the man." Funded by the Bureau of Indian Education, the Sherman Institute in Riverside still accepts tribal children. Today, the school's mission has changed. Its mission is to provide quality education opportunities from early childhood through life in accordance with tribal needs for economic well-being in keeping with the wide diversity of Indian tribes. The writers of California's Constitution provided for a superintendent of public instruction. The task of the superintendent was to begin organizing school districts, building schoolhouses, funding a university, and acquiring teachers. To pay for this undertaking, the state would rely on Congress's 1841 bill that granted each new state 500,000 acres of federal land. The land was to be sold in support of public schools. Soon, one-room schoolhouses would dot California's landscape. Schools would be built in the most remote locations as well as in urban cities. This picture was taken looking down from the Transcontinental Railroad rail line. Pictured far below is the American River. You can just make out a wooden bridge constructed so the stagecoaches and supply wagons could cross the American River. The bridge and the winding road leads to the mining town of Yankee Gyms. Yankee Gyms was once one of the largest mining towns in Northern California. Except for the cemetery and the old post office, now a residence, there is little to see. From the town's glory days, one relic was saved. Saved was the one-room schoolhouse bell. We should not romanticize the early one-room schoolhouses as they were underfunded, teachers were poorly paid. Until 1867, schools were not free, and worse yet, not every child who wanted an education was allowed to attend. Historian Chris Enns researched who were the one-room schoolhouse teachers who risked their lives like Sarah Royce in coming to California and to other frontier territories. Author Enns wrote, between 1847 and 1858, more than 600 women teachers traveled across the untamed frontiers to provide youngsters with an education, and the numbers grew rapidly in the decades that followed as women took advantage of one of the few career opportunities for ladies of the era to do respectable work. Superintendent Mulder gave dire warning that 3/4 of our California children were not in school. These children would grow up into 29,347 benighted men and women, a number nearly sufficient at ordinary times to control the vote of the state, and, in consequence, to shape its legislature and destiny. 29,347 seems like a strange number, but remember the franchise to vote was restricted to only white men. Another question was, who should be allowed to attend California's public schools? Mongolian children must not be permitted in our schools. The parents of Mary Frances Ward tried to register their 11-year-old daughter at San Francisco's Broadway Girls Grammar School. She was turned away. Mary Frances Ward was of African heritage. The Wards filed suit. 18 months later, the California Supreme Court ruled in January of 1874, in California, separate but equal was the law of the land. Mary Ward had no right to enter an all-white school. This decision was rendered 22 years before the United States Supreme Court ruled that in Plessy v. Ferguson, separate but equal was the law of the land. Funding two separate school systems was not financially feasible. This was especially true in rural communities where there were few black students. The problem was exacerbated in 1873 when the United States banks became overextended in financing railroads. The banks failed and a nationwide depression followed. Lacking funding, black students were able to enroll in many small rural communities. In 1890, the California Superior Court reversed the prior decision and allowed for students of African heritage to be admitted into San Francisco schools. Chinese children did not fare any better. They too were barred from San Francisco's public schools. Between 1859 and 1870, a segregated school for Chinese students was established, but in 1871, the district claimed poor attendance and reduced funding for the school. Eventually, the school was closed. With San Francisco not having a school for their daughter, the Tates, being of Chinese heritage, tried to enroll their American-born daughter, Mamie, in San Francisco's Spring Valley Public School. Because she was Chinese, she was denied entrance. Reminiscent of the denial of Mary Ward, the California Supreme Court ruled in Tape versus Hurley that yes, Mamie had a right to enroll in a San Francisco public school, but the law of the land was separate but equal. San Francisco would have to re-establish a school for Asian students, and Mamie would have to attend the new San Francisco Oriental School. On April 18, 1906, a major earthquake struck San Francisco. Many Chinese residents lost their homes. At the time, there were about 100 Japanese children living in San Francisco, attending public schools. With open spaces now available in San Francisco's Oriental School, the mayor of San Francisco told the Japanese parents that their students must now attend the segregated Oriental School. The Chinese and the Japanese had fought a number of recent wars and were antagonistic towards each other. Obviously, the Japanese parents did not want their students moved. The Japanese parents complained to their embassy. President Roosevelt wanted no trouble with the rising military power of Japan. President Roosevelt sent Secretary of State Root to settle the matter. A gentleman's agreement was worked out. In part, the Japanese students would remain in San Francisco's public schools, and the Japanese would restrict sending more laborers into the United States. In California from 1850 until 1948, it was illegal for a couple of different racial heritages to receive a California marriage license. However, California would recognize out-of-state marriages. In the 19th century, the one drop of blood rule became a prominent method of reclassification of children. In California, children from interracial marriages were labeled mixed race or illegitimate. They could be socially isolated, bullied, or denied entrance into public schools. February 19, 1942, Executive Order 9066 directed the military to evacuate all people of Japanese ancestry into detention camps. Colonel Carl Bennetson defined who should be evacuated. I am determined that if they have one drop of Japanese blood in them, they must go to camp. The bar was set at 1/16 of Japanese heritage. Whether you were an infant or an adult, citizen or not, what mattered was one drop of Japanese blood would determine your fate. The then California Attorney General Earl Warren supported mass evacuation of Japanese residents regardless of age or citizenship. Quote, "There is more potential danger among the group of Japanese who are born in this country than from alien Japanese who are born in Japan." 1947, Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals ruled in Mendez v. Westminster School District that in Orange County, California, segregation of Mexican American school children was unconstitutional. Just 2 months before the court ruling, the California legislature passed the bill outlawing all segregation in California schools. The legislation was placed on the desk for the now governor of California, Earl Warren's signature. He signed the bill into law. California was the first state to do so. President Eisenhower appointed Earl Warren Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. The Warren Court ruled that separate but equal, as well as segregated schools, were both unconstitutional. Chief Justice Earl Warren's posthumous statement revealed his inner feelings of guilt, having sent innocent people, especially children, into relocation camps, as well as having confiscated their property. Chief Justice Earl Warren's memoir, published posthumously, revealed his inner feelings of guilt. He wrote, "Whenever I thought of the innocent little children who were torn from homes, schools, friends, and congenial surroundings, I was conscience-stricken. I wonder, in retrospect, would any of those who destroyed the lives of innocent children depicted in this video had feelings of guilt and remorse as well?" This presentation was sponsored by the Dry Creek Conservancy. Look for us on Facebook. See how you can lend a hand and help preserve our watersheds. You can find more YouTube videos centering on Northern California's history and environment on my YouTube website, www.youtube.com/@MichaelStark1.